The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids. Few things are more pleasant than sharing books with children at home, in a daycare setting, or in school. Studies have shown that children who are read to as infants and preschoolers do better when they start school. Today's guest, Dr. Margaret Mary Kimmel, is the author with Elizabeth Siegel of For Reading Out Loud. Today she'll discuss her book and her passionate commitment to the importance of reading with children with Youth Services Coordinator from the St. Paul Public Library, Alice Neve.
It's a pleasure to have Margaret Mary Kimmel here, who's professor in the School of Library and Information Science at the University of Pittsburgh, and co-author with Elizabeth Siegel of the book For Reading Out Loud, a guide to sharing books with children. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your book For Reading Aloud? For whom is it intended?
Well, this is a second edition, enlarged and expanded, because when we first did this, Elizabeth and I decided that parents and teachers were thinking of reading in the same way that one might think of teaching a child how to ride a bicycle. You know, when you ride a bicycle, you learn how to balance on a two-wheeler, and once you catch on to the trick, then you just send the child off, as long as you don't go around the corner, on his or her own. And that there was so much pleasure as well as educational value being lost by not reading aloud to school-age children. So that was why we did the book in the first place, for parents and teachers, to remind them, not that we had discovered anything new, but to remind them of the art of reading aloud and of the wonderful kinds of books that were possible. This second edition, in the first edition, I guess we assumed that everybody knew that reading aloud to youngsters before they could read was a good thing. And in the work that we did between the two editions of the book, we found that there were a lot more parents and daycare providers that needed to be reminded that reading aloud was a very important activity from a very early age. So the book is intended for adults, for anybody that cares about children, parents, and those professionals who work with children.
I find the indexes in the back of the book and the suggestions, the annotations, just wonderful. How did you go about selecting the suggestions in the book? Did you survey your friends or staff or parents? Or?
Well, we are both teachers of children's literature, and we had a fairly extensive background of the literature itself. And both of us had read aloud, either to Elizabeth to her own family. I had read aloud in libraries and public libraries and school libraries. And so from both personal and professional experience, we started with what we knew. And then we asked other people about what had been successful or what had not been successful. Sure. And I guess we must have read more than 1,500, 1,600 books to get.
So that took a while.
It did take a while. And in the first edition, we really annotated the books and selected them first. And then we tried to think of how people might most effectively use them. And that's how we came up with the various indexes in the back, the cross listings, and the areas by the books listed by geographic area, for instance, because we had both found this such a a wonderful thing to do with families when traveling.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yes.
It's so helpful.
Well, all you have to do is to sort of shield your eyes so that as a reader you're not distracted by the passing scenery.
So you don't become nauseous.
Well, there is that, yes.
Your book makes such a poignant effort to explain to parents and children and caregivers of children the importance of beginning to read at day one in infancy, and how this is a way of creating that reading appetite that's necessary later on as children learn to read and to be successful in their development of reading skills and so forth. What are some hints or guidelines that you would give to parents in terms of when the right time is to begin reading aloud to children?
Well, that is a bit of a difficult thing. On one level, it's never too early to begin, but a brand new infant has the whole world to discover. That child is looking at your face and being aware of all kinds of other movements and colors and shapes, and discovering essentially the world. But research shows that as early as 3 or 4 months, infants begin to, well, almost from the very beginning, infants begin to respond to different kinds of sounds. But by 3 or 4 months, they can respond to rhymes, or they certainly respond to words in rhythm and rhythmic patterns. That's essentially what Mother Goose rhymes are.
Sure.
And so 3 or 4 months, 6 months is not too early to begin to show a child a picture, not a story of any kind, but to begin to identify things. Books with a number of different kinds of pictures in them
And bright colors?
Are wonderfully good to begin that pre-language exchange of words in almost an unconscious way, by pointing out things on the page. Here, this is a bear, and what does the bear say? Even though that particular animal might be outside the realm of the child's immediate experience. I mean, we'd hope that a 6-month-old wouldn't see a real bear.
A bear in the yard.
A bear in the yard. But certainly there's a stuffed bear and toys and animals of various kinds. And so it's a matter of really identifying, beginning to build vocabulary. Although certainly the reading aloud experience is not really attached to learning to read as such. It's not really intended, nor is the implication that this is a way of substituting for any other kind of instruction, but it really creates a reading environment.
The warmth, I think, that the person shares with the child as they're reading together is, I think, a wonderful benefit for both the child and the parent.
Well, it's really interesting because in all the time that the book has been out since the first edition, and in all the work that we have done, both Elizabeth and I, with parents and teacher groups from New York to California, parents again and again and again talk about those interchanges with the children as being really the most important. I had a student who was doing a master's in writing at the University of Pittsburgh who did a short piece for the Christian Science Monitor, and she wanted me to look at it. And it was a bit about how she remembered her children as babies. It was triggered by the fact that her 5th grade son came shrieking in the door one day saying that he had gotten from the school library Shel Silverstein's Crack in the Sidewalk. And he was so excited about it, and she was really pleased. And that triggered her memory of reading aloud to the 2 children that she had. And she said in the piece that she remembered that sweet weight against her side. And it may be that there were days in which there were piles of dishes in the sink and the kitchen floor was dirty, but the things that she treasured most about their infancy were those memories of sharing that story.
Those special moments.
Those very special
Yes.
moments, yeah.
Yeah. Recently, we interviewed some executives of corporations, and they said, almost 100% said, what I remember most about the library is being a child and taking the bus down to the library, and when my mother read aloud, or my father would read aloud to us in the evening. And I think those are the kinds of memories we want all children to have.
Absolutely. And I think that in a time in which families and the children themselves are programmed into so many kinds of activities, that these moments of sharing are even more important. You know, not every child is going to grow up to be a compulsive reader. Actually, being a compulsive reader is not all that much fun. You have to read the backs of cereal boxes and bus ads and billboards and all of that. But you want everybody to have the opportunity to read. What reading aloud does is provide a gift that's beyond any kind of cost. It is a gift of story that is simply not measurable any other way.
And a gift of time, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Recently, I was at a family resource fair and was offering library card applications to parents who came in. And so many of the answers when I said, may I register you or your child for a library card?
Right.
Well, the answers ranged from, my child isn't able to take care of books yet. I know they'll just be torn, so he shouldn't have a library card. Or, when the child is old enough, we'll get a library card. And I'm wondering if you have some comments about how to deal with situations where children have never had books and maybe they're 3 or 4 years old and you're just now realizing that you sort of missed some time. What's a good way to start? And then maybe how do you start a family read aloud time?
Well, the best way to start a family read aloud time is to start when the children are young. By the time that kids are in 5th and 6th grade, if you come home and say, oh, I heard this wonderful program today, or I read this brand new book, it's a little hard to initiate unless you have a captive audience. Teachers have that opportunity with a captive audience of one kind or another. But for families, it's really much easier if you start at the beginning and people just continue to expect it. When Elizabeth and I first were exchanging our opinions about reading aloud, she told a story of her son who had been read to all the time before he went to school. And when he was in 1st grade, she and her husband were very anxious for Ken to tell about how he was reading and what kinds of things he was reading, and they were very anxious to share. And the Halloween came and passed, the first teacher conference came, and there was no evidence that Ken was reading at all. So when they went to see the teacher, both Elizabeth and her husband said, you know, we're really worried. Is there something that we could do? We certainly don't want to pressure him, but should we be doing something? And the teacher said, in a very bewildered way, I don't know what you're talking about, why he's been reading since before he came to school. So they went home and talked to him, and it turned out that yes, indeed, he could read very well and had been for a long time, but he was really afraid that if he told them he could read, that they would stop reading to him.
And say, you read yourself.
And say, you read yourself. So I think that for families who are reading now, that they really ought to consider trying to extend that as long as possible. Now, sometimes it's not always convenient with the hectic schedules that we do have.
Have you got some suggestions for that? Families are so busy nowadays, and kids are off to their different lessons and activities. Have you got some tips on how to fit this into a busy family?
Dishes always have to be done, and sometimes that's a good time to do it. Bedtime has been a traditional time because it's sort of the end of the day and a time for people to the whole family to quiet down a bit. Elizabeth talked about the hour just before dinner as being one that the children were particularly hectic, and to save her sanity in their lives, she started reading aloud to them just before. Calmer.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And she said that's why they grew up at all, much less grew up as readers. And I think, so there are a number of different times. I had a student several summers ago who said, well, yes, she would try reading aloud with her children, and found that the morning was the best time after chores had been done, but before everybody disappeared for a day's activities. I think that there are a number of different ways that families have to see how it works in. And those captive times in the car on the way to a vacation, they're perfect.
That's great. You have an interesting suggestion in your book about taping.
Well, a lot of parents are off traveling and doing a number of different things. And sometimes in an extended story, it's possible to tape a couple of chapters ahead, or if you know that you're going to be working late, or something will interfere with the regular ritual of reading aloud. A tape might be a way to answer that. It's never the same as doing it in person, but in circumstances when you're not there, it works sometimes very well.
It says, I took the time to think about you when I was gone.
Absolutely. Right.
You have a wonderful introduction in your book, a foreword by Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers. How did you come to be working together?
Fred has been on television, based in Pittsburgh, for 30 years. And he has donated the archives of his tape to the University of Pittsburgh. So I got to know him because those tapes were donated and the project was one in which I was working. And we worked very closely together on providing those archives to scholars. While he was doing that, he became very interested in a project that Elizabeth is directing called Beginning with Books, which is an early intervention literacy project distributing packets of books for reading out loud to parents through a well baby clinic. That is one way in which he was particularly impressed in taking reading aloud to a daycare provider. And I think that that's what started us in working on a number of projects.
And you have something coming up soon with Mr. Rogers?
Yes, we do. We hope that he will be doing a video aimed at daycare providers about reading aloud and the values of it. And we hope that we can promote that project through public libraries by encouraging librarians to work with those people in the community who are taking care of youngsters on a regular basis. Nearly 50% of our families have children in some kind of daycare or nursery school or care
group
nursery project. And with that transition in the society as a whole, and reading aloud being such an important aspect of a child's early years, we hope that it will encourage both libraries and daycare centers to work together.
That's wonderful. What suggestions would you offer a parent to urge that more of reading aloud in the classroom? What could parents do to help promote that more in their schools? There's so much emphasis on the 3 R's, and one wonders sometimes if there's time in the classroom for this.
Well, I think that's a really good question, because in all the traveling that I've done, in fact, I was in Spain doing some work for the State Department, and I talked to the faculty from the American school, and their complaints were the same as teachers are in Pittsburgh. I don't have enough time to do it. But I think that the enthusiasm of a family sharing of story conveyed to the teacher and to the principal could do a lot to encourage it to happen in a classroom as well.
Perhaps even a parent volunteering to read aloud.
There are some wonderful projects with parents reading aloud at lunch hours, for instance, or after school, while people are waiting for the bus. There are a lot of opportunities within the school day that parents as volunteers might help with. But again, if you think of the sharing that goes on within a family when a parent is reading the story, I think that bonding is also important within the classroom setting. And so it's important for a teacher, not only for a parent volunteer, but for the teachers to read aloud too.
I am always interested in the reaction of children in my house who come home and say, "Oh, our teacher's reading Pippi Longstocking to us." It's just this warmth, this excitement that's caught on. And the teacher says reading's okay and it's great and wonderful is really the message that they bring home.
Reading is a modeled activity. You learn to value it by watching other people. All the research that's been done shows that there's been a lot of research on why kids can't read. But some of the research that I like and I find most impressive is that which looks at why children succeed in reading. And the single most identifiable factor is that they come from a reading environment, that they come from a place in which they have seen other people read and in which they see a lot of material around and they know that this is a thing to do. Now, if that doesn't happen at home, it has to happen in the school in some way or another. And if reading is a modeled activity, then that is something that a teacher needs to be doing as well as the parents. And you know, one of the things about reading and reading studies that have been carried out in the United States in particular shows that boys read in a different way than girls do, probably less widely and much less intensively. But that's not true across all cultures. In Western Europe, for instance, it's just the reverse. And one factor that may be influential in that is that children often, boys in particular, are less likely to see their fathers or those men whom they admire reading or talking about reading.
I think in the United States, reading is often seen as a female activity. And I heard someone say that in the United States, where there are more female teachers in the classroom, there are more young males in remedial reading. And
That's
in
right.
Europe, where it's just the opposite, there are more female elementary teachers, or more male elementary teachers than more
Exactly.
females in remedial reading.
That's right. And it really does make a difference. Now, we don't want the women in Western Europe not to be good readers.
No,
but we
certainly
do
not.
want the boys and young men here to know that reading is a valuable activity. I understand that there are a number of sports people here in this area that are talking about what they take on the trips with them and reading and how reading is important. And I think that's a really important factor, that this is something that fathers do as well as mothers, that sports heroes do as well as ordinary people.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to hear you discuss all the exciting ideas and for reading out loud. And we just appreciate your being here and sharing your wonderful ideas.
Thank you very much.
The gift of time, the gift of reading, something we can all share with the children we care about.
On Alice's birthday, her mother told her she could have a dog. Hooray, a puppy, Alice cheered. Mein Gott, her grandmother Oma said, a dog. The stage is set in the story, which I have been told is the author Amy Schwartz's own story. Alice picks out a lovable but lazy mutt named Bobo, who is in danger of flunking obedience school. Her grandmother keeps muttering, "I told you so, I told you so." But something happens in the relationship. Oma starts to give Bobo some private lessons. When the night arrives for graduation, Alice and her mother go down to the car and find Oma already there with her hat on. "I thought I'd come along for the ride," she said. "Talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words." This is a very good picture book which will appeal to children from kindergartens through about grade 3. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end to this story. The strong storyline will appeal to older children who have a pet or who might want to have a pet and who want to have the whole family love the pet as much as they do. The characters and the dialogue are precise and well defined. The pictures are quite unusual. They're set in Southern California of 1950s, complete with the cars and the pink stucco houses. The characters are amusing. There's lots of pen and ink detail in the watercolor wash pictures. It's with self-explanatory pictures that you can't help but love. Alice may be the main character, but Oma and Bobo are the stars of the show in Oma and Bobo.
Oma and Bobo by Amy Schwartz, reviewed by Sarah Nagle, Children's Services Librarian at the Eden Prairie Community Library. Thanks for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency. We thank you for watching, and we hope you visit your public library often.